How's it going, everybody? Bryan, Alvarez, and Dave Meltzer here, Wrestling Observer Radio. It is September 18, 2018, figure4online.com/wrestlingobserver.com. Got a lot to get into today, including the fallout from Hell in a Cell, but first off, I cannot believe Kid Yamamoto is dead.
Yeah, it's a pretty big shock when I heard the news, just a couple hours ago. He had posted on August 26th that he had cancer, and that was really the last that anyone had heard from him. But didn't make any details or anything like that. And in Japan, when somebody says that they have cancer, although it's a lot different now than it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, it was almost like unspeakable to say it. So somebody, if they had it, you would never hear until they die. Now it's definitely changed. But he said he had cancer, and then a couple weeks later he passed away. And there's really not a lot of details. He was in Guam receiving treatment. So I believe that he died while in the hospital in Guam. And 41 years old. He was just fighting a couple of years ago in UFC, and he was awesome in his heyday. And UFC was long after his heyday, before he had the knee and the elbow injuries. When he came back for the second part of his career, where he never won practically. The first part of his career, he was incredible. He was, you should see the tapes of him. He was, think about it. He was a 141-pound guy at that weight. That was his walk-around weight, not his cutting weight. So a guy like that at 141 is probably, not even probably, he's fighting at 125. And this guy was fighting the 155-pound guys, which, in those days were guys that were 170-pound guys, cutting down. So he's essentially fighting guys that were 30 pounds heavier than him and beating everyone, for the most part. He was 17-1. He won the lightweight Grand Prix. He was the Heroes champion at lightweight. The whole big thing in his heyday was, Uriah Faber this is when Uriah Faber was like the big star under 155. So like at 145s, was him and Uriah Faber doing the dream match, which never happened, just because under contract to different companies, it couldn't be made. And UFC, like when they brought him in, they were looking at like the big thing. And his first match, I remember I was at his first match with Demetrius Johnson, and he was already his first UFC match, and he was already past his prime, and we knew he wasn't going to challenge for any championships in UFC because he was struggling to win in Japan at that point, and Demetrius was just too fast for him. But I would have loved to have seen him with Demetrius when he was in his prime. It would have been fantastic, just for the test and everything like that on both of them. But he was like a rock star in Japan. He had so much charisma, because he was part of the royal wrestling family, with Miyu Yamamoto and Seiko Yamamoto, and, the father, his father, who was an Olympic wrestler. So he had that going for him in MMA, that he was part of this famous family and everything. And that, in a lot of ways, that was the when you talk about his MMA career, it's kind of like the dividing line is 2007, when he was his father never believed like MMA was like a sport, so his father was always negative about, he was an old school guy, wrestling guy, and Kid was brought up basically, trained, sent to Arizona in high school, so he could be trained by Townsend Saunders, who was a great American wrestler, and with the idea that he would eventually win a gold medal in the Olympics in wrestling, because his sisters, who both would have won gold medals when they were younger, but there was no women's wrestling in the Olympics, and I believe Seiko Yamamoto was the same weight class as Zuhori Yoshida. And Zuhori Yoshida was a 3-time gold medalist, I believe. But she's the greatest woman wrestler of all time. So as Seiko was getting out, Yoshida was going in, and Yoshida won the gold medal in the Olympics in that weight division from the first Olympics, which I think was '04 was the first year that I think they had women wrestling in the Olympics. And Miu's prime was like, early mid-'90s, even though she's still fighting in Ryzen right now. And it's actually very popular because of how she looks and everything like that. And I saw Miu in at the Women's Tokyo Dome show in that'd be 1994. When they had that 23 match show that went 10 and a half hours. It was ridiculous. But they had shoot matches on that show. And Miu, that was the first time I saw Miu, and she was like pretty over, when as a world champion. Japan loves their world champions and everything like that. But again, it was long before her heyday that, was the Olympic thing. So here he is, he's in 06, 07, and he's the biggest MMA star in Japan at this point, on these shows that are doing big television ratings and Nike sponsorships and, just a, big commercial success. And he announces his retirement from fighting because he wants to go to the Olympics in 2008. And Japan actually had in his weight class, they had the bronze medalist from '04 in his weight class. So the odds were, he hadn't wrestled in years by this point. So, his odds of making the Olympic team in that weight division, which Japan was very strong in, were slim to begin with. And he did not make the Olympic team, and he got injured while wrestling. And then when he went back to fighting, because of his injuries, he was, a completely different fighter. He just was a different fighter. That's all. But, so that was kind of the thing. But yeah, he was, he had the look, he was like a rock star, superstar. Like, I don't even know who to compare him to in the United States. De La Hoya, maybe, in a lot of ways, I would say would probably be the comparison as far as, name value and everything like that. Yeah, that's probably, I would say De La Hoya would probably be the best American comparison I could come up with in his prime.
And the translation of his last post it's just like, less than a month ago? Although it will be a personal report, I will do my best to treat cancer. I'm absolutely energetic and I strongly want to return, so please give me a warm support. That was it. That was his last post.
Yeah, Instagram, yeah. Obviously he was, and there's still, it just happened a couple of hours ago. And it was pretty big in Japan. It was obviously very big news in Japan, but there's not a lot of detail about it. But I wrote a lot of stuff over the years. The Kid Yamamoto Masato, the first one, I think they actually had a second one, kind of like on one of the New Year's Eve shows recently, but it was sort of like at that point, it was kind of like an exhibition thing. But the first one, which was in '04, so Kid Yamamoto is at this point, this is when the New Year's Eve fighting thing was real big. I think there were 2 shows that night and the big concert, which is like the Super Bowl in Japan in a lot of ways. It's this television event that, it's just this traditional biggest television event of the year. And in '01, Inoki actually was the guy behind booking a show on one of the networks, and Inoki put together a show in '01. It was a fighting show to go against the concert, and it did really well in the ratings. And then it got even bigger, and then by I think by '03 there were 3 different networks did fighting shows on New Year's Eve. In '04 I think there were 2 different networks, and the big match of that night, and there was, if you look back on that night, there were so many big matches. The New Year's Eve was like the thing. It was like they put together these crazy matches, and it was all about television ratings. Like Fedor would fight, and it wouldn't even be one of the biggest matches. You'd have Royce Gracie, and Aki Bono was always really big on New Year's Eve. trying to think who else. No, Naoya Ogawa, was big on New Year's Eve, and they would have pro wrestlers fight, and all kinds of stuff, and celebrities fight. But the '04, the biggest match was Kid Yamamoto and Masato. Masato was a big, he was a great kickboxer, one of the best in the world at 154, and like this heartthrob guy who was, the women loved, and the women loved Kid Yamamoto as well. And he was actually married to a very famous model actress when he was younger. But so they had this fight, and Kid is like 141, fighting as a kickboxer against, legitimately Japan's best kickboxer in that weight, and probably the third or fourth best in the world in that weight, and like a real stud kickboxer, and Kid was not a kickboxer. He was a wrestler who learned striking, and was a good striker, but kickboxing is very different than, kickboxing match is completely different from a MMA striking match. And Kid went in there and he lost, but he lost by decision, and he knocked Masato down once, even though giving up all that size. And that was like really what catapulted him. And then in '05, right after that New Year's Eve show in '04, in '05, he won the Heroes Tournament. He beat Hoyler Gracie and Genki Sudo in the finals, and Cal Uno, who was was one of the best in the world at one point as well as a lightweight. So he beat them all by knockout. So he won the championship, and that was like, by that point, that was like, they still had pride, but I think that was, by then, '05, he was like, Sakuraba's star had faded, Hidehiko Yoshida's star had faded. So Kid was the big mainstream fight star, and he had a bunch of other big wins, and but when he came back, he just he was just different. He just a little slow, in that weight class. When you're slow, when you lose that step, that's it. But what a 41 years old, out of nowhere, kind of. Even, we were talking about it when he had the cancer, only a few weeks ago, because it was that week. It was that week when he came out the same week that Taue came out, and
it was like 4 that we talked about on one show.
On one show, right? Because 2 of them passed away. One of them was what was her name? The the Aya Koyama, the woman wrestler, and then there was who was the 4th one that passed away? Was it jeez,
I can't remember that top of my head.
Yeah, it's right here, I think. Let me look at this. Ed Cohen, remember?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, Ed. Yeah. Jeez. I don't even know what else to say.
Well, we got to talk about Raw, so we may as well jump into that.
Well, let's talk about the Saudi show first. So the Saudi show, they announced officially that show. It will be streaming. It will be Brock Lesnar wrestling. So he's coming back. I'm sure the payday is astronomical. His payday for the last Saudi show was astronomical, and I'm sure this is no different. Brock against Roman Reigns versus Braun Strowman. So they're doing the 3-way. They're doing Shawn Michaels and Triple H against The Undertaker and Kane. So it's interesting because Kane is going to be wrestling in Saudi Arabia. And I guess, at first, I had heard when I was in England, I had actually kind of been told that they were going to do Undertaker and Kane against Shawn and Triple H. I remember that from there. And it was like, God, why would Kane do this? But you know what? He's like, I don't know that there's really, there's a stigma when you think about it, but there's not really a real world stigma. And the thing is he's not running for office. He's already won office. So I don't know that it becomes an issue. If he was running for office, I think this would be something. It would be I don't know, it'd be political suicide or anything, but it'd be something. Actually, we should talk about the concussion thing too, because that's actually a really big story too. But so that match is scheduled on that show, and they're going to do a World Cup tournament, whatever that means. Probably a single elimination tournament, which they haven't done one of those. When was the last time they did like a single elimination tournament with like the top guys?
With the actual top guys?
Yeah,
1985. I don't even know if those were top guys.
Wrestling Classic. Well, yeah, you had a lot of top guys in the Wrestling Classic. King of the Ring had a lot of top guys in the early
Mania
years.
4 had some top guys.
Mania 4 had a lot of top guys.
King of the Ring had kind of top guys, but it was always like...
No, I mean, at the end, it was more high middle, but at the beginning, you had like, if you look at the guys in the first couple of King of the Rings, it wasn't like you had the world champion in there, but you had a lot of top guys in the King of the Ring. I mean, you had like Randy Savage and people like that, who was pretty strong top guy. But yeah, I mean, we're talking about Randy Savage here. We're talking about going back, decades. I don't know exactly who's gonna be there, but it's gonna be. I mean, that's gonna be the basis of the thing. Other than so. I mean, that's, let's face it, these shows are far bigger than WrestleMania as far as economics go. So, that's why Shawn's wrestling on it. And that's why Lesnar's wrestling on it. And, so that's the deal. So they announced on the show, they actually did the thing. So in Australia, I guess the setup is that Undertaker's wrestling Triple H and Shawn's in one corner and Kane is in the other. Mm-hmm. So that's there to set up the Saudi Arabia match when I guess those guys both interfere. And so what do you figure? Oh, well, I don't know. It doesn't really matter who wins the matches. I mean, I guess on paper you go Undertaker wins the first one and then Kane's there to do the job in the second one, I suppose. But who knows? It could be any, you can do pretty much anything. But yeah, that's the thing. So many different shows they're promoting at the same time. They're promoting I guess the next one they're promoting is Australia, October 6th. And then they're starting to promote the October 28th. They went real hard with the Saudi show, which is November 2nd. Really not touching the Survivor Series, which would be the next, that'd be the next like traditional pay-per-view. Although the Australia show and the Saudi show are both pay-per-views. And the Evolution show's a pay-per-view. So this is the first time that they're promoting, they'll be promoting for the next couple of weeks, 3 pay-per-views all at the same time, which is very unusual. I can't even think of a time when they've done that before. I mean, there have been times when they promoted 2 where you have WrestleMania and you have a pay-per-view before WrestleMania and you kind of promote them, or when they had the split brands, when you had the Raw pay-per-view and the SmackDown pay-per-view. So, you'd be promoting 2 pay-per-views at once. But I can't recall ever doing 3 at once.
Well, this concussion lawsuit.
Yeah. So everything's thrown out. I mean, if you've been following it, that's not a surprise that everything was thrown out. The judge had kind of already made a ruling that, I mean, here's the thing. It's like, did you read the different lawsuits when they came out, the actual wording and everything like that?
All the way through, no.
Okay. Well, there were lawsuits. I mean, if you read them, I mean, the one thing about it is if you file a lawsuit throughout morality or anything like that, if you're the file lawsuit, a lot of lawsuits are just nuisance lawsuits type of thing. And this felt to me almost like that was like the idea. I mean, there is a legitimate question here, but the lawsuits were filled with problems. The big one, which is the one with the 53 wrestlers, you had guys, just as an example, Paul Orndorff, whose name's been in the news this week anyway. So Paul Orndorff, I mean, he was certainly most famous for his time in WWE, but as far as like his entire career, it was a small part of his career. I mean, it was the biggest part of his career as far as notoriety goes and financially and everything like that. But, he wrestled for years. He started wrestling in like 76, probably. He was a star real quick because he was such a great athlete. and he went to WWF like at the end of 1983. And, 84, 85, 86, 87, those 4 years, he was a top guy. Him and Hogan had maybe the best drawing house show program in the history of the company. Him and Hogan, and I think the two biggest were really him and Hogan and Bruno and Zbyszko. So he was on fire as a heel, great performer and all that. And then afterwards, then he had the injury, which really hurt him badly. He did make a comeback, although he was never the same. But he wrestled for many more years, and then he was in WCW, and he got do you remember the thing? Was Stuff Pile Driver? I remember it was an angle involving Pillman, where Paul, got that injury live on a Nitro. That pretty much, even though he actually came back from that as well.
I'm pretty sure it was a Stuff Pile Driver.
It was a Stuff Pile Driver, I remember that. But it was in WCW. And he'd already had the neck injury before, the herniated disc in his neck from probably 86. He got the original neck injury, the bad one, that ended up where we had remember Orndorff was like super muscular, but when he had the injury, it's like one of his arms was like really small, it was still kind of cut. It kind of had and then the other arm was like really big and muscular. And, no matter what, even, years later, he always had that imbalance. Even when, I remember seeing a TV show, what it was. This is long after the big injury with the big injury. And he's doing dumbbell bench presses. Pretty heavy, probably, not super heavy, but heavy enough, like 90-pound dumbbells, and doing reps of 10, or let's say.
Okay, wait, hold on. Before you finish the story.
Yes.
So the 1995 Stuff Pile Driver,
yeah,
that was, I believe, storyline. And then he came back, and in 2000, he did a pile driver, and he screwed up his own neck doing his own move.
No, he was injured in the other one though, because he didn't wrestle for years. They're both legitimate injuries, and he didn't come back like the one but yeah, they did the Pillman thing was meant as a storyline, but he actually was hurt at that time.
I see.
Yeah, and then the other one, right? He did the one on he gave somebody a pile driver, and his neck went out, right?
Yep. And they stopped the match and carted him off.
Right. So that's 2000, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he never did wrestle after that one. Of course, WCW died by that point. So anyway, going back in the Orndorff thing, the whole thing is so when we say this, it's okay. Now this neck injuries have nothing to do with actually all of this, because we're talking. Paul Orndorff is suffering from dementia right now. Bad. It's very bad. It's sad. You weren't at the Cauliflower Alley. You didn't come with us the Cauliflower Alley when Orndorff gave the speech. Then it was in 2016, I think.
No.
Okay. So Orndorff gave the speech, and I can remember it very well. It was actually a hell of a speech, and it was only 2 years ago. And he's talking about it was really great. His son Travis gave a speech first. It was really awesome. And but in the speech, he was talking about how he sometimes he forgets things, but it didn't sound like it was bad, like so many of the guys. Let's face it, the number of guys. It's just natural. I think in this business, it's something that you just deal with is that a lot of the guys when they get older, because of the nature of the business, they're going to have problems. But in the last 2 years, it just got terrible. So anyway, Orndorff's in the suit, but it's like we say, Orndorff had a long career, from the start to the finish, it's 24 years. Obviously he did not wrestle all 24 of those years, but he wrestled 76 to 87. So that's 12. And then had, so he's probably, we're talking 18, 19, 20, 18 to 20 of those years. And 4 of those years were in WWF. So it's and he legitimately has terrible problems right now. That's legit as legit comes. But can you attribute them to WWF? Can you attribute it to football? I mean, he was a high school football star. He was a very good college football player. Was drafted in the NFL draft, never made an NFL team, but was in camp, played whatever it was, I think World Football League or whatever the secondary league was in the 70s when he was around. And then the other thing, and a lot of people don't know this about Orndorff, but he did like real fights before he became a pro wrestler. He actually became a pro wrestler because he was beating everyone. They had, and I don't even know what to call it. I mean, I guess it's sort of like MMA, whatever it was, but they had this circuit in Florida where guys would, and this is long before UFC, but where guys would, fight each other, like boxers or whatever, but it was like kind of like no rules fighting. And Orndorff was really good at it, but, that was really dangerous stuff. And then, the Florida office found out about it, and they recruited him to pro wrestling because he was such a badass. But the point is all of these things, the football, the fighting, and the years and years of pro wrestling, probably all play a part. So how do you, what is those 4 years in WWF? I'm sure it didn't help him, but you can't, like for any of these guys, Don Leo Jonathan was in the lawsuit. He probably worked he had that 1 year in the 70s, 73, 74, maybe a year total of a 25-year career was in WWF. And there was WWF. But so it's like, how do you, or Jim Brunzell, who's, most of his career was AWA, and these guys are all in there. Yeah, they were in WWF. Yeah, WWF probably didn't help their cause any, didn't help it with anyone. So how do you, so you got that issue. Okay, which is a very real issue. And so that's part of the suit for a lot of those people. But the key thing is the statute of limitations, essentially, on a suit like this. The judge who was presiding over the case had already made rulings some time back that it was 3 years after, whether it's 3 years after you left WWF or 3 years after your career-ending injury, you have to file suit or you fail on the statute of limitations, statute of repose, whatever, time barred. So they'd already thrown out a lot of the original people who filed based on the time thing. And basically, just about every single person who had filed that suit was, well over 3 years. The problem with the 3 years, though, is using that as the, let's just say that you're a guy who is suffering from legitimate problems. And some of the guys in that lawsuit, when they're talking about their problems, I was skeptical. Let's just say I was skeptical that they were legitimate, and other guys, without a doubt, were legitimate. But let's just say that you had a guy whose whole career was in WWF, ended up with, memory problems, cognitive problems, brain problems from whatever, okay, had concussions and all this. It really was due to damage suffered while in WWF.
I'll give you a great name.
Okay.
And I'm using this name because he's young and, far as I know, has no symptoms, but a guy like Edge, he wrestled his entire career in WWE.
He did some indies, but
he was there during the Monday Night Wars where everybody was whacking each other with chairs in the head. He fell off a bunch of ladders.
Yeah.
He took as much abuse as humanly possible, and he retired in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
So he is now 44 years old. So let's say when he's 60, he's got some serious cognitive issues.
Well, let's look at even more Christian, because Edge retired due to neck injuries. Christian retired due to concussion injuries.
Well, I used Edge because Christian had at least been in TNA, and Edge was a guy that only did WWE. But yes,
right. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's that's a name. Yeah, you could say that. But the thing is like, okay.
Well, my point is, at 60. If he has all of these issues, I mean, you can point to one thing. It's got to be his WWE career.
Absolutely.
But then the statute of limitations, are they going to say, well, listen, it was so long ago that we can't hold anyone responsible for that?
Yeah.
With something like CTE, that doesn't seem right to have a statute of limitations.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the one flaw in all this is that if you have, I mean, like, you're not going to get, most likely, you're not going to find out about these problems within 3 years after you retire from wrestling or 3 years after the injury takes place. It's probably going to be 20 or 30 years. So that statute of limitations on a brain issue is a really bad standard to use. I mean, just from a moral standpoint. Now, there's a question of should they be responsible or not. And you know what I mean? The other thing in this case, one of the key aspects of this case was the argument that they were making, which is that WWF knew about these problems and did not inform the talent of these problems. And from a WWF legal standpoint, they are claiming, I mean, there's two ways to look at it. It's like, look, we all knew, perfect example is Lance Storm, okay? I mean, there was nobody ever heard of CTE when Lance Storm was wrestling in ECW, okay? And guys were doing, Balls Mahoney was in ECW and Masato Tanaka and those guys. You remember the stuff those guys did. I mean, I'm to this day, I'm amazed that Masato Tanaka is the shape that he's in, which is good shape. He's wrestling. He's still, now he's in his 40s. He's probably not what he was even 3-4 years ago. But 3-4 years ago, I mean, even now, Masato Tanaka is a good wrestler. He was a great wrestler, fantastic wrestler in his prime. But it's hard for me to believe that there's not going to come a day of reckoning for Masato Tanaka. But those guys, but Lance, Lance would never do the hard chair shots to anybody, and he would absolutely not take them. And this is long before Chris Benoit and long before CTE, because it's
common sense.
It's common sense. Okay. I mean, but look, every promotion, I believe, I'm trying to think if there's any promotions there probably were promotions that weren't doing like the hard chairs to the head. Probably a lot of them. Because I remember when I grew up, the chair shots to the head that they did with Roy Shire were soft. It's like they would do the hard chairs to the back and they would do chairs to the head, but they were so soft. Nobody ever hurt anyone. Later, I would watch these other promotions and these guys would go full on. And I remember like, this is in the late 70s and the 80s when I would see this. And I would cringe back then because of common sense. And they did that in many promotions, not just WWF. Mexico, they still do it now, still. And I remember some of the shots. I saw a shot. It was Art Barr and Pero Aguayo, the father, not Pero Jr. So it was in Guadalajara. And Art Barr gave Pero Aguayo like this chair shot to the head. That was so bad. Like, I still remember it, obviously. And, Pero was still like ringing, the next day because we were at the show like the next day as well. So on the next day. And Pero, Pero's in as far as like, and that was hardly the only chair shot to the head the guy took in his career. But Pero, was by the time he was in his 60s, he was way gone. Like when his son died, they wouldn't even let him speak because he was so, he was in terrible shape from, I'm sure it's from all those chairs to the head. And all the other punishment that he took because it was dangerous business. Now, so anyway, in this case, the legal aspect of the case was that WWE was not aware of CTE until 2007. None of us were, which is true. I'm sure that they weren't. And that they never were aware of CTE like the NFL was, where it was brought to them and they kept it a secret from the players. And that's why the NFL, ended up settling big in those cases. There was never that. And as soon as WWF, they fought the CTE at first. If you remember when the whole CTE thing came out with Benoit, they were fighting that diagnosis at first and trying to act like it was a fraud diagnosis and everything like that. But in time, very quickly, you remember like Nowinski, would Nowinski in WWF, if you remember interviews with Nowinski in WWF where he was, I would say negative towards WWF. I mean, it was always more football, but pro wrestling, which wasn't as popular as football and couldn't get him the headlines football could. But he was very much, talking about, how bad it was. And look, Nowinski's problems, even though he played football, the reality is his real bad problems came as a wrestler. So, wrestling is dangerous. And God, you remember when Nowinski first was writing about this, the wrestlers, God, I mean, nobody would say it publicly much. A few guys did, but most wouldn't. But privately, Nowinski was viewed as like this enemy of the state. And the wrestlers were like, when in that first year or so, 07, 08, that period, 09 even, they viewed Nowinski really, really bad. Well, now WWF is a donor to Nowinski's foundation. He doesn't talk bad about wrestling anymore. He's not obviously pursuing brains of ex-wrestlers to examine, as he was at first. And WWF is, they have seminars, to everyone. They this can never be a safe business. It's impossible. But, they take precautions. I mean, sometimes I think it's funny when I say they take precautions when you see some of the stunts that they do. But they do take, in their own way, they do take precautions most of the time, and at least they don't encourage really bad headshots. They still do some risky bumps and things like that. But so anyway, the whole gist of all this is that from a legal standpoint, when they knew, they did tell the talent, they did have seminars with the talent, so they were not withholding information from the talent. So that's kind of like the defense. So from a legal standpoint, WWE is in good shape. The question is that even saying all this, they're still in a dangerous business. They're still going to be, guys, especially now when you have guys, Roman Reigns, perfect example. I mean, Roman Reigns is going to be a guy who, more likely than not, from day one of his career till the end of his career is going to be WWF. Or you're going to have a guy like, say, Sami Zayn, who comes in and makes himself a superstar all over the world, and then comes to WWF, and then, will wrestle in WWF the rest of his career. And, but some of these guys, without a doubt, are going to have problems when they get older with their brains. It's just the law of averages. Some will, some won't. Should they be able to sue if their entire career was in WWF? And I don't know the answer to that. I mean, it's like, if the injury takes place in WWF, should WWF be responsible? I mean, my gut says yes when it comes to that. Now, from legally, let's just say Roman Reigns, right? Let's just say Roman Reigns wrestles his whole career, retires in his early 40s. He's fine. And then in the 60s, we start hearing about Roman Reigns having problems. Although, maybe he's not a good one because he played so much football. But let's just, whatever. Should they, I mean, by the law, the way it's applied in this case, they have no case. I'm not sure that that's right. But when it comes to these cases specifically that were sued over, there were just issues with it. And, Konstantin Kairos was the lawyer who was essentially recruiting guys for this suit. I mean, you read these suits, and I mean, I'm reading the suit, and I'm going like, this is bullshit. And I don't know, and he had warnings for years. He was told, get the bullshit out of these suits, get the bullshit out of these suits. And Vanessa Bryant, Judge Bryant, who made the ruling today, throwing everything out, her ruling was like, look, I've told you over and over again, get the bullshit out of your lawsuits. You don't. You change them, but you're still full of shit in some of these lawsuits. There's still things that shouldn't be in here. I've told you over and over again. I'm tired of telling you, so I'm throwing the suit out. So that's what happened, and that's why the suits were out. And, again, these were, there's too many questions with so many of these talents as far as being able to directly blame WWF, WWE in these suits. Okay, so, but there is an underlying reality to this. And, the idea of a 3-year statute of limitations, so to speak, on this issue is kind of terrible. So that's the other aspect of this thing. So, it's like, it's not a knee injury that ends your career that you're suing over. You know what I mean? It's a brain injury and, but even like a knee injury or a back injury or something like that, it's like a lot of the times these things, in any of these injuries, but the brain injuries in particular, you're going to be in your 50s, 60s, 70s before they, long after your career's over, before you pay the price. You know what I mean? So it's like that 3-year thing to me on the surface is just, it's just such, to me, that's just like basic logic that to hold people to that 3-year standard. I mean, I guess there's a legal thing to it and you got to go by the law, but that's wrong. Isn't it just like, I'm just talking about fair and obvious. Obvious, right? Isn't it just like really obvious that this 3-year thing is stupid? It's just not fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mentioned that earlier. That's the whole problem with everything.
Yeah. It's very, yeah. So that's the issue with the thing, but those lawsuits are all out, and Orndorff was Brian Blair had mentioned this, just a couple of days ago, just this week, because he'd done a GoFundMe, which they raised the money that they were looking for. He hadn't paid his property taxes for his house in like 4 years, so he was about to be kicked out of his house, and he said that I guess he was that Orndorff, he still recognizes his family. And, obviously in some cases this gets bad where you can't even recognize your family. That's not unusual at all. But he still recognizes his family and maybe some other people. But they're with Jerry Briscoe. And he noted that that in the same conversation, 4 times, Orndorff would ask Bryan, who's that guy that's with us? And he'd say Jerry Briscoe. And, Orndorff's known Jerry Briscoe for, easily 40 plus years. I don't remember if they, they were in the same fraternity and all that. And he didn't know who he was. And in the, like I said, in the same conversation, he'd be told, and then a few minutes later, who's this guy? Jerry Briscoe. And then he'd ask again, a few minutes after that. So it's kind of that's a real serious situation there.
All right, let's talk about this Raw show. What did you think of the follow-up to Hell in a Cell?
It's the same as every other week. It just feels very long. A lot of tapes, a lot of weird, it's like they're doing lots and lots of charity, which I guess they probably feel they need to do right now for other reasons, because of the Saudi show and everything like that. But they do it anyway. It's part of their MO, and Nia Jax getting that award, and which is not the one we even talked about. Originally, this is a different award, and just it's a show. I don't. I don't know. You put Roman Reigns and Baron Corbin in the main event. Baron Corbin
Oh my God.
It was kind of boring, and then you had that
the absolute balls of these people going up against football and announcing in the first segment that if you stick around for 3 hours, you'll get to see Roman Reigns versus Braun Strowman in the main event.
Baron Corbin.
I was astounded.
Okay. Yeah, but the thing is that it's very rare when you have a Universal title match on Raw. It doesn't happen every week. So I think that their mentality was, and this is a big night. I think their mentality was, we're giving them a Universal title match. Baron Corbin is a character that we promote very hard on TV. And they basically told you from the start that Roman Reigns is hurt. But here's the thing. So these two guys, Roman Reigns and Strowman, okay? And also Ziggler and Rollins. Oh, by the way, and even worse, so I don't know if you know this or not, but Jeff Hardy wrestled tonight?
I did not know that.
Jeff Hardy wrestled tonight.
How about that?
Yeah, I thought this was going to be, some deal where he's out for months.
No, of course not.
He wrestled the next night. But it's like, you do that. I mean, Rollins and Ziggler took that big bump through the tables from halfway down the cage. They had a match tonight. And it's like they told you it. They told you they were weak. But then they go out there and they pretty much wrestled their normal match, right? I mean, I watched it. It was like, they weren't like, it wasn't any different from anything. And Roman's working the same match he always works after we're told that he's all weakened from, and again, how weak are you going to be? I mean, it's like it's a dichotomy. It's like he was so weak that they couldn't continue the match. He was so weak that when he speared the guy through the table, which they do all the time, that he was down for whatever it is, 6 minutes, 8 minutes, however long, and then Brock beats him up and he's out, even more beats him up with the parts of the table and the F5 and everything. And Roman's out there, so he's hurt, but then he goes out there in the match and, he did every move that he usually does. It's the same. It was pretty much the same Roman Reigns match, except not as good because Baron Corbin does a slower match. And then they did that other gimmick, where they do the DQ and then he restarts it. But yeah, the gimmick is that hold on because Roman's hurt, so Baron Corbin can win the championship over a hurt Roman Reigns. So that was the idea, not so much that...
So they actually thought that after they wouldn't give us a finish last night because they didn't want to beat anybody, that maybe on Raw tonight, Baron Corbin's going to become the Universal Champion?
I don't think anyone really thought that.
Yes, I think the third hour is going to die. I've been wrong before, but
it's still Universal time. I mean, I don't. It depends on. There's a lot of factors. Look, the third hour usually goes down. 8 weeks out of 10. So, the odds are, tonight was expected to be a real struggle, but it's still the show after a pay-per-view. So those normally do, especially now for whatever reason, the show after a pay-per-view seems to do fairly well. I guess the pay-per-views are bigger now, with the dual brands, with both brands on the same pay-per-view. Maybe, yeah. So
well, let's get into this here. Roman Reigns comes out. Recap Hell in a Cell. He's talking about all the things that happened. He's still the champion. He wants Brock Lesnar right now. Braun comes out instead. Roman is annoyed by this, which doesn't make sense because Braun, in fact, does deserve a rematch because the match got screwed up. So he says Roman is lucky Brock came down because otherwise Braun would be champion right now. Brock has screwed him twice. He's not going to do it a third time. He vows to kill Brock Lesnar. He'll come back and take the title from Roman. Baron comes out, says it's not happening. Says nobody's more upset about last night than I am. Been on the phone all day. I've signed the rematch. It is Friday, November 2nd in Saudi Arabia. Roman Reigns, Braun Strowman, Brock Lesnar. So Braun's pissed off, says all of this sucks. Corbin sucks. Roman sucks. Everybody's cheering him. So he says, you all suck. And he walks away. Heyman comes out next. Brags about last night. Explains the more you're worth, the bigger star you are. If he goes to UFC... he'll become a bigger star, make more money in WWE. And if he comes to WWE and wins the Universal title, he'll make more money in UFC. So basically, Brock wants the title back.
Well, at least the interesting thing is that Heyman in his promo, pretty much it was kind of like a half shoot in the sense that Brock's playing both sides off against each other, which he obviously is.
Yep.
And he's making so much money because of it. It's like the idea that, I don't know what the number is that Brock is getting for this show, but it's the number is I'm sure the number is not $1 million. It's millions of dollars to do a 3-way match in Saudi Arabia. It's incredible.
So anyway, he talks about how they signed record TV deals. They made tons of money when Brock was champion, but then Roman and Braun teamed up to steal it, and Brock's going to go to Saudi Arabia and take it back. So Braun goes after him. Heyman flees. Corbin and Roman are in the ring together. And essentially, Baron Corbin announces here in the first segment, it's you and me in the main event of Raw for the title. There you go. That's the segment. We have Drew McIntyre, Dean Ambrose, and Dean worked over his knee early. Drew did a great job selling his leg to the point where he actually did this spot where he kind of helicoptered Dean into the barricade and then went down grabbing his knee, and I legitimately thought he may have twisted his knee. But it was selling. And Ambrose worked him over and hit his tope, went up top for a dive. Drew sidestepped him. Dean smashed in the barricade.
Now, I thought watching that one that the idea was he was going to smash in the barricade and he landed short and landed like on his face right in front of the barricade.
Well, one way or the other, he crashed.
He definitely crashed.
And he had 10 seconds to get in the ring. He made it in at 9, and then Drew immediately hit the Claymore kick and pinned him. So, giving the big push to Drew McIntyre right now.
They're very much protecting him. But you know what, though? Sometimes when you watch something like this and you go like this week, they protected him. And then next week, like Dean may beat him and get his win back. And it's like, why did we think that they were like doing anything other than their normal booking?
We had Corbin meeting with Drew and Dolph backstage. And he says, Shield's not looking good tonight. He says, Dolph, are you invoking your rematch clause for the Intercontinental title? Dolph says, I'm hurt. I fell off that cell. Corbin says, well, Seth is hurt too. I hear he's not even in the building. So if you do that match and he doesn't show up, I will strip him of the title and you will become the champion by default. So Dolph...
Is that like legal?
It's Corbin. He can do anything. He's in charge of Raw.
Then why didn't he just make himself champion?
Well, we'll get to that in the main event.
Why didn't he just say like the title can change hands on a DQ and tell the referee to DQ the other guy?
We'll get to that. Dolph is greedy. He accepts this match. We have Natty backstage with the Bellas. Ronda shows up. Ronda Rousey wants to know, how does an open challenge work?
That was a really weird. Wasn't that really weird?
They
like,
say,
she's only been watching this TV for how many years?
Well, to be fair, she says, do I have to ask somebody or do I just go out there? And my presumption would be the answer would be, you got to ask somebody. It's television time here. Yeah. But their answer is, just go out there. So she went out there later.
So this show is like anarchy. You can just do whatever you want.
Do whatever you want.
How come the interview's so bad then?
Especially with Corbin there, he's supposed to be running the show, but he's also wrestling. I mean, it's just nuts there right now. Chad Gable and Victor actually had a decent little nothing match here.
Chad Gable's freaking great. Even in a match with Victor. And Victor
got to do some stuff.
Victor is a lot better worker than he gets credit for because he's in that lame tag team that doesn't get a push and all that. But I've always thought he was, pretty talented guy. Chad Gable is, again, even though now he is getting a push and everything, and they kind of are doing something with him, so it's good. But I still think that he's the one guy in this company who I think just should leave for the betterment of his long-term career. Because I think that outside WWE, he would elevate himself into like you watch him. I mean, like he's talented, like the Ricochet guys. You know what I mean? Like that level of talent. But in WWF, I mean, now they're a little bit doing something, and he obviously is showing it. But I just think that like he could go and have like a couple of years if he were to go, like to the Japan thing. And he would just be like incredible, like top guy. And then when he went back to WWF, at that point, he could go back in as a top guy. And I'm not so sure that in WWF that he's ever going to, that again, like right now he's the thing. But it's like, Vince, if you ever watch Vince's booking, when it comes to these guys that are, well, I'll just call them undercard prelim guys in their mind. And then sometimes they're really talented. I mean, they did this a couple times with Evan Bourne. They did it with, remember a couple weeks ago they were doing it with Mojo. But everyone, goes through this little phase where, God, this guy's really good. Let's do something with him. Okay, we'll do something with him. And then 3 weeks later, it's kind of like, whatever. And then they just forget, and then they end up going nowhere. And I don't know if this Chad Gable thing is going to be that or not. But, most of the time when Vince is, occasionally like, when Vince has his mind that some guy's a prelim guy and they talk him into pushing him, it usually goes nowhere. But there are exceptions. Shelton Benjamin probably had like 5 of those runs in his career, things like that. Who was a very talented guy too. Although I think Gable has more than any of those guys all around. Evan Bourne's a different issue. Evan Bourne's super, super talented, but his problem was he was small at a time when small was still a big deal. I just, it's 2 weeks in a row. The guy just looks great. So, we'll see where the whole thing goes. It looks like, he's probably going to wrestle Connor next week. So that'll be a challenge.
Well, I think next week it's going to be Connor and Rude.
Oh, that won't be any good at all.
Well, anyway, Connor distracted Gable. Gable made a comeback. Connor tried to interfere again. Rude stopped him. Gable hit the Chaos Theory suplex, and then Connor ran both of them over and left him for dead. I guess it could be Gable versus Connor, but
or they could just
it's a tag program, so I figure that
maybe they'll just do the tag team match again.
It's got to be Rude.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, would make sense because then Rude can do the job because the storyline is that Gable's doing all the work for this team, which just began.
Yeah. I mean, it does, and even at the house shows they're playing it up. It does look like the real program is Gable against Rude, which, if done correctly, I think can be a real good program. But we'll see, again, we'll see basically Vince's patience on this angle, because this is one of those things where Vince kind of forgets about these type of things very often.
Seth showed up. He's all beat up. They alert him that Dolph is getting his rematch tonight. If Seth doesn't wrestle, he'll be stripped of the title. And he says it's still Monday Night Rollins. Undertaker came out for an interview. Does this big promo nobody's ever seen. He's never seen anybody with a more broken soul than Hunter. Hunter used to be a warrior, a savage. These days he's playing corporate games. Cannot see his own demise coming. Says he's going to put him 6 feet under. Game over. And he says he's welcome to have his best friend Shawn Michaels at ringside, but Shawn is not going all the way there to just sit in the audience. He's going to be in his corner, so that's fine. In his corner will be Kane. And he says, I ended Shawn's career. I'm going to end Hunter's career. I'm going to take his soul. I'm going to take his career. He will rest in peace. Fans loved it. They don't make him like The Undertaker anymore. I loved this segment. It was very good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know about Kane doing Saudi Arabia. Well, whatever. He probably won't take any heat for it. I mean, and it's I don't know. If I was him, I wouldn't do it. But then again, if it was me, it'd be. There's just no way I could do that. There's no way I could do this show. I know they got the deals and everything, but I think it's such a bad look, especially with the obvious. It's like if you knew the situation, you kind of knew, even though they denied it immediately, about the women's pay-per-view. But now, the way that thing is structured with, basically like 4 days or whatever it is, 5 days in between, it's like, it's so obvious. It's almost like too obvious. It's like almost like if I was going to do that, I would make that pay-per-view like a month earlier rather than like 4 days earlier, just so it's not so obvious.
We had another Connor's Cure video segment with Bayley and Sasha and the kids, and then Bayley faced Dana Brooke, who has separated herself from Titus Worldwide so that she can come out here and do a job for Bayley in a nothing match.
Actually, I thought that, considering it was a Dana Brooke match, that this match was better than, way better than I expected it to be.
It was okay. But why have we sat through weeks of this Dana Brooke, Titus Worldwide build up and split for her to be just like a loser? What's the point of all of this?
I was thinking the same thing. What's the point? They had this idea, and then they just, it's like when I always think, because when I grew up, this is kind of what it would be. If you do a booking move, there's a reason for it, in the sense that somebody's supposed to come out positive. They will do moves, and this is a prime example. nobody benefited from this move. It's like, Dana Brooke wasn't exactly going anywhere as part of Titus Worldwide, but she had something. But now that she's not there, it's like there's no storyline coming out of it. There's no feud coming out of it. It's like there was no benefit. They're not going to like push her. So it's like, what was the point of what exactly was the point of any of this? Maybe he just thought that the statistician thing had run its course, and it probably did, because it never went anywhere anyway. So it's like she was taken out of a nothing gimmick and then put in a less than nothing gimmick. So it wasn't a positive, other than she did some cool moves. The one thing she can do all those round offs. And that's, from her fitness competition. So she incorporated that in her match, which made her look far more athletic than, doing a match that she'd done in the past. But in the end, yeah, it's like she's not going anywhere. Doesn't look like it anyway.
AOP destroyed 2 dudes, Super Collider. The gimmick by now.
Yeah, same exact thing as every time.
Corbin, Ziggler, and Dolph have a meeting. The match is on, and they announce Shield versus Braun, Drew, and Dolph for the Australian show.
That match has been announced a long time ago, a couple weeks ago.
We had Seth and Dolph Ziggler for the Intercontinental title. There was a little bit of selling. Seth sold his knee, unsurprisingly. Dolph sold his shoulder. But
it was still just a normal match.
Yep, they went to commercial, came back, all of their usual near falls. Rollins with a ripcord knee, as they're calling it now. Dolph went up top, got crotched. Then Seth goes for the superplex into the Falcon Arrow. Dolph counters it. Seth hits the curb stomp, goes for the cover. And even though it's a late cover, he gets the pin. And the fans go nuts. It was a fun match.
Yeah, it was fine. It was fun.
Very fun match. Roman Reigns with Charlie. They're telling a story here that Roman Reigns is the underdog in a match with Baron Corbin.
Roman didn't even buy that for a second.
No, he's like, are you kidding me? Maybe I'm an underdog against Brock or Braun, but against Baron Corbin?
He shouldn't even say he's an underdog against Brock. He's the champion. Yeah. And he's been beating everybody, and he's the star. He shouldn't be the underdog against anybody. But yeah, against Baron Corbin, that was quite laughable.
We had Hispanic Heritage Month, Brie Bella, Andrade Cien Almas, Zelina Vega, Roberto Clemente, and Sasha Banks.
And Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio. And
she's a big fan of Eddie Guerrero.
Yeah, and are we missing anybody?
Mostly,
I think we are missing somebody. Oh, Brie Bella's father.
Yep. Ronda Rousey out for the Open Challenge. Did get a few boos here. Then they chanted her name. Congratulates Alexa. Last night was the best performance she'd ever seen out of Alexa, she said. She pushed me close to my limits. Wants to thank everyone for showing up. Thanks, Alexa, for showing her that she's more of a champion than she thought that she could be. Alexa Bliss has proven to Ronda Rousey that Ronda is more of a champion than she thought that she could be.
Well, she's evidently, whatever.
Low self-esteem. That's what I got out of this. Wants to be like Bret Hart, Stone Cold, Ric Flair. So she issues her Open Challenge. Natty's music hits, but she's dragged out by the Riot Squad. And they say what we had to do to Natty was all your fault. We're going to shut you down. So they get in the ring. Ronda's taking them all out one by one. Then Ruby spears her in the bad ribs. They triple team her. Bella's hit the ring to make the save. Ronda and the Bellas clear the ring. No Open Challenge.
Nah, we're getting this. This was set up the six-person match for Australia.
Yep.
Which I guess would be the Bellas' turn on Ronda, right?
If they're doing that for the Evolution show, yeah.
Yeah. That would be the likely thing. Knowing them, maybe they won't do anything like that. They'll just shake hands and then it'll be a challenge. Who knows what they'll do?
We had Braun meeting with Baron Corbin. He says he hopes Corbin wins tonight, and then says, and I quote, "You suck, and I know that I can kill you."
That is what he said.
So they are allowing Braun to threaten to kill people. And the Drifter out to do his thing.
Nobody believes that. So
he says he knows how bad the show can be before he shows up. Every week he gets interrupted. He's interrupted by, of all people, Leo Rush. Drifter wants to know whose kid is this. Everyone cheers. They go back and forth. Leo Rush introduces Lashley. We have Lashley versus the Drifter. Lio Rush's commentary, he's profoundly annoying. I have no idea how this guy is a babyface, except when Kevin Owens finally came out and Lio Rush was running and jumping and rolling and doing flips and avoiding the big guys.
It was kind of entertaining.
The fans did love that. But, oh my God, he's
such
so weird.
He's such a natural heel.
He's absolutely a natural heel.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, it just brings up, this has nothing to do with this, but it has everything to do with this. Renee Young is better than Coach.
Yes.
But I got to say that watching this show, she wasn't good at all. I mean, it's that whatever it is, that third person. I mean, they've had a string of, from Otunga to Booker. I mean, it's been a string of bad people in this spot, and she's far from the worst. But she's not good either. I was really hoping, that she would be good, and man, just. It was.
Well, you said it. She's better than Coach.
She's better than Coach, but not much. Not much better.
I'll take not much.
Yeah, I mean, Coach would make me roll my eyes, and I never roll my eyes at anything that Renee Young says, but it just feels like she's got nothing to say, and so much. I mean, a lot of it. You're put in a position. It's hard to be good as a WWE announcer on Raw. I think it's
practically impossible.
Well, Graves pulls it off. He's all right.
Well, he was good, and then for a while he was absolutely horrible for a few weeks, and now he's back to being okay. But it seems to be like a battle.
Well, it is, because when Graves was in developmental, he was fantastic, and then he gets to Raw, and now he's okay. Michael Cole, if he's doing a show that's not Raw or SmackDown, he's actually very good. I remember Renee Young when she did NXT, and I didn't think that she was anything special doing NXT, but that was years ago. But yeah, I do think that being on Raw makes it tough. Foley was more on SmackDown, but still, Raw and SmackDown's the same thing. But I thought that Foley and Taz were much better, but they couldn't deal with Vince. He drove them crazy. So I know it's obviously, he drove Ross crazy. It's a tough job. It's a tough job dealing with Vince on the headsets. It's one of those things that, like, maybe it's better if he just lets him be rather than drive him crazy.
Maybe.
Yeah, right.
With Alicia, Mickey, and Alexa doing a promo challenging Ember to find a partner for later. And Ember did, in fact, find a partner. And the returning Nia Jax. This was not much of a match until Nia got the hot tag. The hot tag was great. She ran over. First, she ran Alicia into Mickey. She threw Alicia across the ring. Avalanche. Beal runs her over. Mickey hits the ring. Ember hits an Eclipse off the top. Nia hits a Samoan drop, gets the pin. Very good from the hot tag on. Nia actually looked great in her comeback. So hopefully she can keep it up. She was moving a lot better than she was before she left.
Mm-hmm.
But she's been off the road, so we'll see what happens when she's back on the road. Corbin, here, Baron Corbin's backstage. The heel general manager of Monday Night Raw, who's trying to win the World Heavyweight title, the Universal title, bigger than the world, the Universal title. He says to the referee, I want you to call it down the middle.
Yeah, but the implication was he was saying this for the camera, and he really wanted the referee to cheat for him.
Well, he gave the referee, he was too subtle, because the referee did, in fact, call it right down the middle. But anyway, he tells him to call it down the middle.
Yeah, he did, yeah.
We had a Florence deal by the announcers. You can text Florence to 90999 and donate $10.
Yeah,
at Hardy's house, Scott Dawson's house.
Scott Dawson's house get messed up?
I think it was Dawson, wasn't it? He posted something on, I'm almost positive it was Dawson.
Too bad. I know Matt's house flooded. I know that.
Yep.
It's really too bad.
And obviously not just the wrestlers, but everybody. So
Because these things are, that's another issue. I'll tell you what, and this is, not just the United States, but worldwide, the amount of disasters there are. We have just, man, what we have done to this environment. It's like, when I was a kid, I always, you were kind of told that, but you kind of thought, it's, you know what I mean? It's like, the world is the world and these things will happen. But it's, all the stuff that we're doing, we're sacrificing the future and everything. And boy, we did it. And it's like, we don't know, but it feels like there's no turning back. It's like the damage has been done and we can't undo the damage. And we've, I don't say we, but, a lot of people with no thought for the future made a lot of bad decisions that what can you say?
We had Baron Corbin, Roman Reigns. This was, in fact, the main event. And they went to commercial. They came back. We got a long hold by Baron Corbin. Then we had another long hold by Baron Corbin right at the top of the hour. Finally, Roman makes his comeback. And Corey could not believe that Roman Reigns might actually be able to beat Baron Corbin. And Roman's setting up these moves. Corbin rolls outside. Goes back in. Roman sets up a move. Corbin rolls outside. Roman sets up a move. Corbin rolls outside. And finally, it's Roman with a chair. The ref DQs him. I was like, if I never see another Baron Corbin match, as long as I live, it will be too soon. I spoke too soon. Corbin immediately restarts the match.
Well, didn't you know that was coming?
No DQs, he says.
You knew that was coming. They've been doing that constantly.
I'm like, you're not trying very hard to win this title, Corbin. So yes, the match restarts.
So now he's doing the chair shots. He should be able to win the title.
No, what you do, Dave, is you hire a referee to just, like you said, the title can change on a DQ, and then throw a chair at Roman and have the ref just call for the bell. For crying out loud.
Yeah, but
this fool should be able to figure out how to win the title.
Yeah, well, you're thinking too much because they obviously don't.
I've hated this since the '90s. This heel ref, it's just idiotic.
The heel ref, it always sucks.
It's terrible.
Heel refs. Like if you do it, like once every 2 years as a gimmick in one match, it can be very effective. But when you do it constantly, it's just a pain.
Yeah, but it's always dumb. It's never good.
It's completely
like the heel referee is going to cheat, and he's going to cheat, and he's going to cheat, and he's going to cheat. But then he's going to count 2, and the guy's going to kick out, and he's going to stop his count.
I know.
Dude, count to 3. Yeah. You're beating the other guy up. Anyway, I will give them credit. Corbin hits this deep 6. Roman kicks out. The fans bought that as a finish.
The fans pop for that.
Yeah, that was a great near fall in this Baron Corbin match. Dolph and Drew run down to help because Braun's out there. The Shield runs down to brawl. We got this giant brawl. Roman hits Braun with a Superman punch. Ambrose and Rollins do these dives. Roman teases a dive, but Baron cuts him off on the apron. Baron then gets in the ring. Roman spears and pins him 1, 2, 3. He retains the Universal title. And all of the fans, allegedly, all of the announcers, the company, they're all shocked that Roman Reigns has retained the title. But in fact, he did. He is still the champion.
I don't think that anyone should have been shocked, obviously.
I actually thought this was a pretty good Raw.
It was a Raw. I don't know. I mean, I didn't hate it or nothing. I guess it was better than average, but it's just, these shows are never dynamic. Although I guess before Raw, I watched the Tai Chi and Hiroki Goto match. Oh,
my God.
Did you see that match? That match was,
are you kidding?
It was horrible.
I read the review, and I was like, I got hours in my life I want to retain.
That match, I mean, seriously, that was the worst big match in New Japan in God knows how long. It was everything.
And Taichi's the champion now.
Taichi's the champion now, yeah. Oh. Yeah, he won with interference. I mean, tons of interference. Terrible ref bump situation where, Red Shoes gets knocked down, and he's down for like forever, and everyone's interfering, and it's just to the point of just ridiculousness. And like the first 10 minutes of the match were Taichi just stalling. And, it's one thing when you stall and you kind of get heat for stalling, and you can kind of go, well, he's getting heat, and he's just building up heat and things like that. It's like he was stalling, and there was no heat. and he just keeps stalling. And I swear to God, this match was maybe, you could argue that this was like the worst match of the year. I mean, it really wasn't, because the reality is the last 5 minutes were pretty good, but this match still, overall from start to finish, it sucked. And they put the title on Taichi, he sucks. God. Anyway, yeah. I didn't see the Naito Suzuki. I heard that was a really good match, but, I was going to watch it, and then unfortunately, ever since I get back from England, I like fall asleep at weird times, because I guess maybe waking up at 5 a.m. is going to make you fall asleep.
Maybe that's a bad idea.
Yeah. I've been falling asleep like at 10. So, yeah, it's tough.
Well, we're out of time here. We got a lot of stuff coming up over the next couple of days. The new back issue of The Observer is up. We got a ton of shows up. The new Observer, I believe, will be out on Wednesday this week.
I hope so.
Back on the regular schedule.
I might be a day late just because there's so much stuff to watch and so much to, so much to write. I mean, especially, I did do the like tonight, like I had all this stuff planned to do, and then Kid Yamamoto passed away, so I actually did 3 stories on him. God damn. So it was just such a sad story, though. I mean, he was, it's 41, and it's like a really dynamic personality. I always felt bad when he did his comeback because, it's like you had this guy who was like really like one of those like almost like special athletes, like a Tiger Woods or something, or John Jones or whatever, where they're really gifted at this thing. And then, after injuries, they're just a guy. And, when he came back, when he was in UFC, he was like bad. I think the smaller guys anyway, I think it's real tough on the smaller guys when they get older, because it's such a speed game, and you lose that and with a knee injury, I think is probably like a big thing. You're going to lose that speed, because when he was in UFC, the one thing with him is that, his confidence was gone, and he was just slower. And that's all the difference in the world, which is too bad. But when he was such a great fighter when he was younger, and not just a great fighter, but super charismatic guy. Like I don't know who you compare him to. Maybe McGregor. He wasn't a promo that McGregor was, but as far as like just a guy with just incredible charisma. He was. Great look, great charisma, he was the marketer's dream, of a guy, the women loved him, the guys loved him, he had the family background. He was right place at the right time with all the attributes, and he was the biggest star they had, and it's a real tragedy.
All right, everybody, we're going to wrap it up. Thanks for listening. We shall talk to you again after a while.